a big part of the story of the last year, and we've talked about this a lot, and a lot of my colleagues have as well, and I would say of the first year and a half of the presidency, actually, is all of the efforts at pushback, all of the people out there who are pushing back against the Trump administration, people in the streets, people in courts, people filing lawsuits, so many people participating in the pushback. And because Trump seems to throw something new at the wall every day, sometimes crazier than others, it can feel at times like those efforts aren't working, like they aren't keeping up with the pace of Trump's destruction. But the truth is, Trump is actually on a pretty big losing streak right now, and a particularly big one on this Friday. I mean, take, for instance, Donald Trump's decision to slap his name on D.C.'s iconic Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. Late last year, I'm sure you remember, Trump just decided to rename the building after himself, slapping gold, gaudy letters on the building above John F. Kennedy's name, before eventually ordering the iconic cultural institution to close for 2 years so he could make his own renovations to the building. Well, today a federal judge ordered the Trump administration to remove his name from the building within 2 weeks, and he also blocked the administration from taking any steps to close the institution. And that lawsuit against Trump's Kennedy Center takeover had been in the works. It wasn't last week. It's been in the works for 5 months. But it took until now to see some tangible results. And Trump, for his part, took that news about as well as you would expect. Today, in a lengthy, screed essay-like on Truth Social, he lashed out at the judge who made the ruling and said he would now try to transfer control of the Kennedy Center to Congress, basically suggesting he has given up on his battle to take it over, which there are a lot of things to be concerned about right now. That's frankly a bit of a relief. But that is far from the only battle the Trump administration is losing right now. Ever since Trump's ICE takeover of Minneapolis, local prosecutors have been on a mission to hold ICE agents accountable for their actions in that city, as they should, as the people of Minnesota and across the country are demanding. Well, today we saw the first arrest of an ICE officer for his role in one of the shootings that took place in Minneapolis earlier this year. Christian Castro was the ICE agent who allegedly chased a man into a residential home, fired a gun through a closed door, hitting a man in the leg, and narrowly missing a child's crib. Now, at the time of the incident, the Trump administration claimed the agent had fired in self-defense. But that story, of course, completely fell apart. And now that ICE agent has been arrested on charges of second-degree assault and falsely reporting a crime. And that news came just hours before we learned that federal agents have agreed to withdraw from the parking lot of the Delaney Hall Detention Center in Newark, New Jersey, where for a week now, federal agents have clashed with protesters and Democratic elected officials. The protesters have been trying to draw attention to what the ACLU says is a hunger strike by hundreds of detainees at the facility who are themselves protesting inhumane conditions and treatment inside the facility. Now, DHS continues to deny that hunger strike. But today, after federal officers charged into a crowd of protesters, pushing them to the ground and spraying them with a chemical irritant, after an officer beat a protester with a baton across the torso, thighs, knee, and calves as the protester just tried to flee, the Democratic governor of New Jersey, Mikey Sherrill, established a protective zone around the facility run by state police rather than federal law enforcement. The governor also called for the facility to be closed. So the administration is being held to account for some of their most reckless and unpopular actions. And yes, sometimes it takes a while for the legal system to catch up to these reckless actions. But in some cases, the pushback is happening much more quickly. Remember, it was only 10 days ago when the Trump administration announced its settlement, essentially with itself, establishing a $1.8 billion slush fund to benefit Trump's political allies. They tried to make it seem at the time like this slush fund was accountable to nobody, that it could not be stopped, not by the courts or Congress or any third parties. They were very, very braggy about it, in fact. I mean, they claimed that because Trump and his DOJ had settled out of court, that the agreement was basically untouchable. They tried to make it seem like January 6 rioters and Trump allies were going to get your tax dollars, and there was really just nothing anyone could do about it out there. The settlement even included a clause that said, quote, there shall be no appeal, arbitration, or judicial review when it comes to what they can and can't do with all that money, just because they said so. Well, unfortunately for Trump and his allies and January 6 rioters, that is not actually how the law works in this country. I mean, today, a federal judge in Virginia blocked the DOJ from creating Trump's slush fund and barred them, at least for now, from giving anyone any money. And while that ruling, it's only temporary, it is also coming out of just one of the many legal challenges the fund is already facing. A January 6th prosecutor is suing to try and stop the fund. Members of the Capitol Police are suing to try and stop the fund. The nonprofit Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, they're suing to try and stop the fund. A bipartisan group of 35 former federal judges are suing to try and stop the fund. Heck, even the host of the popular podcast Mueller, She Wrote, is suing to try and stop the fund. All of those lawsuits are attacking the fund also from different angles, with different arguments for why the fund should be stopped. And tonight we got word that yet another of those lawsuits scored yet another major victory against Trump. Tonight, the judge who initially oversaw Trump's lawsuit against the IRS reopened the case. And this is a very significant development because remember, as part of his settlement, I'm just going to keep putting in quotes last week, Trump voluntarily dismissed his case. He dismissed it just days before his personal lawyers and the Justice Department were going to be forced to explain to the judge how the heck they were actually oppositional parties, how Trump and the department and the IRS that worked for his Treasury Department were on different sides, right? Since ultimately they're working for the same man. And if the judge didn't buy their story, it could have been grounds for the judge to toss Trump's case altogether. So instead of actually working through the court system, Trump settled out of court, again, with his own Justice Department. And he clearly wanted everyone to just assume that was the end of the story. But it's not. Hardly. It's definitely not the end of the story. Because that bipartisan group of 35 former federal judges I mentioned earlier, well, they took action. Just 2 days ago, they asked the judge to reopen the case on the grounds that the settlement and the slush fund it created were a product of collusion that was itself a fraud of on the court. And they asked her to open an investigation to whether Trump and his sons, Don Jr. and Eric, or the Justice Department, or both, defrauded the court to obtain their so-called settlement. And tonight, Judge Kathleen Williams did just that. And in her order reopening the case, Judge Williams gave President Trump 2 weeks to explain his position on the following issues. One, the allegation from the group of former judges that Trump and the Justice Department colluded, and the allegation that Trump and the Justice Department are not truly adverse parties. Good question. Two, the allegation that Trump's voluntary dismissal of the case was premised on deception. And three, whether the case should be reopened or not, because Trump and the Justice Department may have committed fraud against the court. Now, all of those very serious sounding things Trump put in his settlement with himself about how the settlement was unappealable and couldn't face judicial review, well, it turns out that was all bluster. And now Trump will actually have to make his case in court. Not just for why he should be able to settle a lawsuit with himself and get a $1.8 billion slush fund all set up, but for his immunity from IRS audits and those for his family, too, and everything else he effectively gave himself in the settlement he struck with his own Department of Justice. Now, to give you a sense of just how vulnerable Trump's supposedly ironclad and unreviewable settlement actually is, tonight, people familiar with the matter told the Wall Street Journal that Trump's top aides have discussed whether he should just kill the slush fund altogether. First of all, why did it take you so long? That would be my question. Using it as a sacrificial lamb, a bartering chip to get ICE funding passed next week. And they think they can do this, I gather, because more than a dozen Republican senators have reportedly urged top Trump aides to drop the fund. That's just in the past 10 days. It's more than one senator a day. Now, the slush fund is on very, very thin ice. That is clear. A bad day, as I said to Chris, for a slush fund, for Trump's slush funds. And if people keep pushing back, which, given all those lawsuits, I expect they will, that ice could very well break.